Hello and welcome to the second video in the series on research ethics and coursework at Haskell. And in this video I'm going to talk about confidentiality and informed consent. So not all situations that we face in doing research is the same, and so it's helpful to know the protocols and to know how to show respect to your sources and how to document that process. So the first thing we should talk about is what is informed consent. The definition is that agreement is given by a person for participation in research that their information may be used. So in other words, you contact a specific person and they will say whether or not they are comfortable with you using their information. And they make an agreement either verbally or by implicit consent or perhaps by signing a document. And the key elements here are that they would give this consent after being informed about what the project is about, without any undue influence, and with setting clearly what the level of confidentiality will be. So it helps for us to understand what the spectrum is for confidentiality when we think about it in the context of research ethics. So the first level here on this list is anonymous, and anonymous means that the information can never be linked to the source. That might mean that as a researcher we would disguise information, change names or places if in terms of using data, for example, from interviews or observation, and so we would want to hide all that information, perhaps even changing things so that it's harder to figure out what or where the data was collected. It may also require keeping the information secret or finding a totally different source. So for example, if you learn something from an anonymous source and it is really important and interesting, you may never be able to use that data, but it can still inform your thinking. And if you can find a different source for similar information, then that would give you the you would use that information rather than the anonymous source. So the key here is the information can never be linked to the source. The second level is confidential. So that means that the students or researchers know who provided the information, but nobody reading the study or hearing a presentation would be able to know who the source is. And that would be actively organized to prevent others from knowing. And so again, this might involve disguising or hiding information that could connect the data to a specific person, to a specific group, or to an organization. And usually this information then would be used, grouped together with other information and then stripped of identifying details. The most common level of confidentiality in business research, especially for our coursework, is no restrictions. And that is basically that the information and the source of the information is fully transparent. And most of the people we talk to, especially when we're speaking to leadership or to entrepreneurs, have no problem with us sharing the information that they provide and for using their name. So what is involved then? So voluntary agreement is being given by the person for doing the for participating in the research after being fully informed. And no matter how informal the survey or a conversation is, the participant in your research, whether they thought they were going to participate in it or not, they should fully understand the purpose of your research activity and who will see the final report or presentation. So just to give an example, if you're in an MBA course and you're doing a project at your company, they should know what the purpose of the research is and that both the professor and possibly your direct management level above you will see the report. And that might affect how open they are willing to be with you. And so it's important that you would share that information. Then they would choose between or agree to anonymity, partial or full confidentiality, and transparency, which means no restrictions on sharing the information and their identity. They should know without a doubt that they have a right to withdraw at any time. So that means that if they say, yes, I'll participate, and then 10 minutes later they say, I'm not comfortable with where this conversation is going, or I don't want to answer these questions in this survey, then you either skip to a totally different topic or you thank them for their time and you leave. They always have the right to say no, and we will always respect the no. And then they need to understand the benefits and the risks of participating. And generally speaking, these risks are not significant in business research, but we should consider the possibilities, and we should make sure to share those possibilities with the person or people we're talking to. And then make it clear that we would like them to give consent freely, and if they feel there's any undue influence, then that doesn't count as consent, and so we would not continue. So just as a pro tip, usually when we do surveys, we would do surveys anonymous, and if we're doing an interview, it's either confidential or without restrictions. There are other methods, of course, but those are the two main ones that we use in business research. So we do have different documents in business that often talked about confidentiality as well, and this is slightly different than the research ethics issue. So one type of confidentiality agreement is the non-disclosure agreement, and this would combine guidelines for an anonymity and a confidentiality, and the idea is to protect information, ideas, or transaction details or other information from being revealed to outsiders. And sometimes honoring confidentiality means keeping everything secret, or it may mean avoiding identifying information or numbers, or it may mean restricting who can see the report to just your manager and your professor also needs to sign the NDA. In Calgary, we have 2 degrees of separation. This town is very networked, and people really know each other across surprising boundaries. And so it's really important to show extra care when speaking about businesses and ideas with others, because it's easier to connect the information to sources than you think. So it's very important we know exactly where the boundaries are. And with an NDA, usually those boundaries are very strict, and it's best just not to speak about the ideas and the information. Some organizations may provide their own non-disclosure agreement, and our guidelines within the school is that you would sign and the professor would sign, and copies would be uploaded into D2L Dropbox just for the record. There's no grade attached to that, but there is a value to you and to the school in knowing that we have the documents in a place we can retrieve them easily. And every project or course might have a different requirement. So some courses actually would have everyone in a class sign a confidentiality agreement so that we could have open conversations within the classroom. So that is something that your professor would actually discuss with you. So in implementing informed consent, how would you do that? So if you're collecting anonymous information or data, for example, taking a survey on the street or sending a survey through the internet, through Facebook, and you're just asking for information, you really don't care about their name or their email, then you can just have a verbal script if you're speaking, or a written script at the top of a written survey, and that would be somewhere between 1 to 4 paragraphs long, depending on how you organize it. And it should include all the elements, and there are templates that you can copy to make sure that you get it right. If you're actually having an interview with someone or collecting data that will be transparent, then you might want to implement a signed consent letter. And again, this would be so you have the documentation. So you would be explaining the project and everything to a person, and then have the consent letter for them to sign before the interview, or in some cases, as I will talk about in a minute, you might need to create a release form after the interview, because sometimes you'll have a conversation, not realize it's going to become relevant to your research. So you have this terrific conversation, you want to use the information, and so you come back and you have a release form, and that would specify, can I use this information? This is the project, this is the course, this is the context, this is who will see it. Can we use it for a short time, for a long time? Can we use it freely after a specific amount of time? So you may need to adapt according to the situation, but the goal here is to get as broad a release as possible so that you and your class and your professors can all learn from your experiences. The informed consent letter, the template, and there's scripts examples. It's all should be posted to D2L. If it's not, you can ask your instructor to give you some examples. This is available for all our Haskell students. And we also always recommend that you upload anything that you do use. So if you edit a script to put on top of a survey, put a copy of that survey with the script into the D2L ethics Dropbox, and then it's there for legal reasons if there is ever an issue. And I can say that there never has been an issue, but this is a situation where you want to do the right thing and you want to make sure it's documented that you did the right thing. So that's informed consent. Really important for us to remember that we don't just talk to people about our project and help ourselves to their information. They should be aware of the context that we're asking, within which we're asking for information and what we plan to do with it. And I hope that they will always consent with no restrictions, because that makes our life easier. But we always leave the choice to the person we're talking to. Thank you for that.